A very good evening and a nice applause indeed for Bart Reining, our performer of tonight. A very warm welcome live from the Chassé Theater here in Breda, an evening on cancel culture. Organized by the Chassé Theater together with Studio Zeitgeist in collaboration with BredaPhoto. Why have you organized this evening and why are you joining here on the YouTube channel and are here some people present in the theater live? Quite special that we have some people here live in the theater. You're using YouTube. If you log into YouTube, you can use YouTube chat because we would like to have a conversation with you about cancel culture. Why are we organizing an evening on cancel culture? Well, because this cube over there, here you see the remains of the work of Erik Kessels. He was one of the artists part of BredaPhoto, organized in September and October. The work was was on the floor of a skate park Pier 15 here in Breda. And the nature of the work got quite some comments on the social media and also by an anonymous grouping called We Are Not a Playground. There was a petition signed by many people, photographers, creative artists, who were demanding or asking not only for the removal of the work in the skate park, but also for structural changes in BredaPhoto and in the cultural field in general. Well, the work was removed because sponsors from the skate park were not happy with the work and with the commotion. So the skate park decided to remove the work, which was regretted by BredaPhoto. But now we are here to discuss not only this case, but also when it comes to cancel culture at large. because this is what this evening will be about. How can we see this phenomenon, not only what happened here in Breda, but in general? What's currently happening in our culture, in our societies? Where is it coming from? Who are these new voices, and what are these new voices demanding? We'll start the evening with looking broad, what's happening, and we will focus slowly more and more on the cultural scene. And also we'll have, of course, Erik Kessels and Fleur van Muiswinkel from BredaPhoto herself to discuss the matters in general and what we're discussing today. And it will end with a more general, broad view from what's happening also in Belgium, in the international scene when it comes to the discussions we're currently having. My name is Vrijdag. I will be your host for tonight, and during this program we'll have another performance by Bart, so also something to look forward to. Let's start our evening, and we'll start the evening with Linda Duits.
Good evening.
Yes, good evening. Social scientist specialized in gender and sexuality. Well, as mentioned, we would like to explore this theme a bit broader to begin with. So we're talking about cancel culture. It's a pretty new phenomenon, or the name is pretty new. It's also a controversial name. How do you interpret this cancel culture phenomenon?
It's difficult to give a definition. It appears to be a term that's used when there is large critique, when there are voices mobilized, mostly on the left, it appears to be. Mm-hmm. And then the other side, because this is a term that really started out in this polarized climate where we are today, and then the other side responds to the critique by saying, well, this is cancel culture, and it's threatening our freedom of speech, or it's threatening our freedom of academia. And in that way, it's also a way of bypassing critique, mm-hmm. In a sense. So I see it as a judgment that's being made about the way that we are treating each other right now when it comes to debate, critique, conversations, being unhappy with certain things. Yeah.
Interesting, and you're already saying so many things. It's mostly from the left progressive side, and it's framed by the opponents as cancel culture. So the title of the evening, we're already using the frame of the people who are judging about this new phenomenon.
I'm not sure if you're using that frame. Yep. I will first have to see how the rest of the evening goes. Mm-hmm. But it is a term that you see being used in that way. So you hardly see, or I haven't seen that with activist groups that you might label on the left side, where they are saying about culture on the right side that something is cancel culture. Of course, it happens on both sides as well. Yeah. I mean, I'm wearing my Star Wars sweater. When The Last Jedi came out, there were a lot of groups arguing that this was a feminist film, that it was a disaster, that the franchise was being ruined. There was a petition out to remake the film, to rewrite it. So you might also call that cancel culture. So it's also a call to cancel. Yep. Yet it appears to be that term is reserved for left-wing activism. Okay. But for me, what's for me really interesting as a social scientist is to look at the power actions that are going on here. So it's a term, you already said it right, it's a very recent term. It's very much tied up with social media. So because of the rise of social media, everybody now has a platform. Everybody now has a voice. We are no longer dependent on gatekeepers like journalists to have these voices heard. So you see that people can organize themselves that previously had a difficult time organizing themselves. And they are critiquing, whether that be a work of art or a representation somewhere. You see a lot, if you're on social media, you see a lot of calls on Netflix where the subtitles are either racist or sexist. Yep. And then they're calling to cancel that, or at least cancel the people that are creating the subtitles. But
let's explore this a bit. So what's the range of what's being called? What are the voices using now? What kind of themes are their voices being used to raise what kind of question? Or is it anything?
It can be a lot of things. Yeah. So of course, representations in the media are an easy target. Yep. For instance, I mean, this was the summer of body positivity.
Yeah,
so
indeed.
there was a lot of critique on Linda de Mol, who appeared on the cover of her own magazine, arguing for body positivity. And then a lot of people said, that she lived up to the beauty ideal nonetheless, so that she wasn't allowed to use the body positivity. So we see a lot of media representations.
Yep.
But we also see it aimed at people. So you have the little emoji where somebody is throwing something in a bin. Do you know that emoji?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So that's sort of used as, that person or that thing should be cancelled.
Yeah. Kind of a cancel emoji.
It's a cancel emoji, sort of the throw away, cancel your account, quit your account, these kind of things.
Yeah, indeed.
So anything can be part of that. So you see that what usually happens is that there are some voices that connect to one another, that share the same critique, and via social media, their critique can become louder, and they can
amplify.
They can amplify. And as I said, I think this is all about power, because then the question is, do they actually have the power to cancel something? So thinking about...
Okay, let's go a bit on that later, because you're really going fast.
Okay.
And so we're saying we see a broad range of themes being popping up because of these new voices, because now you have the freedom to say whatever you want, like using social media.
And be heard. So
and be heard,
of course we had the freedom before.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody could sit on their couch and disagree with something and say, this should be thrown away, or that person
but nobody's
should be thrown
listening.
away. Yeah. But then it's only your flatmate listening in. Yeah.
So that's a difference. But then I guess, and that you're researching this, what kind of themes are dominant in these new voices? Are there really specific themes? You could say, we respond on media and on what we see on the media frames, but maybe there's some themes which we see reoccurring in this new voices.
So we live in a time of heightened activism, which is also a reason why I think this is happening at this moment. So within the new feminism, certain themes are very important. So representation, and then of course there's the call for intersectionality that's going on. Black Lives Matter, of course, is a movement that comes to mind here. So within these kind of themes, associated again with the themes that are now popular on the left. Yeah.
Okay. And before we go into this question of is it effective? Are there things being cancelled? Because I think that's a very valid question. What kind of persons are behind this? Could you say something? Is it because the themes are so broad, but you mentioned some specific areas? Is it a specific person who is using these new options?
What do you mean? What do you
well,
want
is it a generational thing? Is it a gender thing? I don't know. I mean, just
it is, I think, a generational thing. So it's something that's connected to young activists. But of course, young activists also find allies and find like-minded people in people that are older. But it is something that really has to do with social media. So it's social media savvy people. So you see individuals. You also see people that always support each other. Of course, there's cliques in the same way that you would have on a school yard. And you also see that the more and more that activism grows, you see a kind of level of professionalization going on with activism. So then it becomes easier to find each other the next time.
Yeah, you're right. And when it comes to social media, that's a pretty broad term. Are there specific channels within social media or which are extremely useful for this, or is it?
So it's not LinkedIn.
No, exactly. It's not LinkedIn. Okay.
Where this is happening, of course, Twitter is the main playground, I think, or the biggest extension of the public sphere right now, because of course it also has to do with this extended public sphere. I don't know that much about Facebook, and of course Instagram is also a way of mobilizing young people.
Okay, so these are the means which are being used, the type of persons, because this is new media, so it's a bit more in their digital native minds. Then this very important question you raise yourself: how effective is it? I mean, are these new voices canceling something? You have the impression.
So that to me, of course, as a social scientist, that's the most interesting question. It's a question about power. So Take the example of J.K. Rowling's. She has done she said some things that people call trans-erasing or trans-exclusionary. Yeah. She had a lot of critique on Twitter, on other social media as well. She was definitely being called for to be cancelled. Yeah. Yet when her new book came out, she didn't sell a copy less, right? She's still very much a powerful person, yeah. And maybe it didn't really harm her career. Mm-hmm. So this is, I think, the question that you must ask when you look at this phenomenon. So also, what does it mean? The act of calling something cancel culture. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? Yeah. What does that do in terms of power? Who is allowed to speak, who is allowed to voice the critique that they have, and what kind of response are you then getting? Yeah. So we see that a lot of these people that are very active on social media do not have a lot of power in real life. They do not have the power to actually cancel something. No. The question is also, do they, because most of them, they don't really use the word cancel. So that's also interesting to see, what are they calling for? We also have this phenomenon called call-out culture, what you might compare it to. So what are they calling for? That's
like an alternative wording for cancel culture sometimes used, right?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And then, are they calling for a boycott? Are they calling for... So today there was actually an interesting incident on Dutch Twitter where people thought that a statenlid, I don't know what the proper translation is for that.
Working in the province.
That she had called to cancel Jip and Janneke, a very famous Dutch children's book. And it was cut, like it was edited, the clip was edited in a way that it seemed that she was calling for that. And then it turned out that she was actually not. And she was, what she was saying was, these kind of books will eventually go out of the libraries because they become dated and then nobody wants to read them anymore. But there was a big row where people were saying, oh, she's canceling Jip and Janneke, it's book burning, it's cultuurkamer. So it's also something that you have to sometimes see in the light of this polarized climate, and also sort of the ophef du jour, the commotion of the day, where people also enjoy this fighting.
For 24, 48 hours, we're completely focused on this, and then we move to the next topic.
Fighting the other side.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't want to take away any of the criticism that people have with anything, but it is this sort of constant machine going on, where, which also should be mentioned if you look at power, where these social platforms it's in their best interest that there is commotion.
It's how they make money, right?
This is how they make money, and it's quantifying these voices. So this is also something to take into account. That's
a paradox, that you have this voice, you can use this voice now to give your opinion and alter maybe structures, although you're a bit more relative on this, if it's really happening. But you're also feeding the algorithm where these Silicon Valley companies are making bucket loads of money with. Interesting. So one thing before we go to some more guests, and of course you can pitch in those still when they're there. What do you currently see as the impact on society? So because you say, well, I'm not so sure about if something's really cancelled, but you do see it's feeding the polarization which is already going on. Very short statement on what's the impact currently, and what do you think is going to happen in the...
I think. I don't think that the freedom of speech is being threatened at all. I think the fact that we are here, that you organize this debate, that people are talking about it, but also the attention that was brought to we are not a playground, which means also attention for this issue, which to me seems like the best thing that can happen to an artist's work. People get angry about your work, people are talking about your work. That's doing a lot of things, and I don't think that that's threatening anything of our freedoms in society. Mm-hmm. I'm also a bit skeptical about what this activism will bring us. It might not be a surprise to some viewers at home. I'm also on the left side. I'd like to see, racism and sexism and homophobia cancelled and gone. Yeah,
but it's still there. So,
but it's still there. Yeah. And that has to do with Also, the idea that social media gives you that you have a voice. So you can really amplify your voice, you can be really loud, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're being heard by institutions where power lies. Yeah. So that's a caveat as well.
Yeah, okay. Let's invite some other guests and then they can see if you want to join as well. So we now go to, I would like to invite on stage Alina Lupu and Koen Klein.
A cancel emoji, a cancel emoji, a cancel emoji.
Maybe that's already...
Please, you have dips.
Yes, you're...
Go ahead.
Le mot du jour, a cancel emoji. Two new guests to join us, and as I said before, please join us for the discussion online, but also here in the audience. We have a microphone ready, so during the conversation there's absolutely room for you to raise your voice and give some input on what we have been discussing. And again, you have to log in to YouTube. My apologies for that, but once you're logged in, you can also use the chat for any questions, and I have my little tablet here, and I will see your questions. So hopefully you will join us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Alina, artist, writer and activist, and Koen, art critic of the Groene Amsterdammer and editor-in-chief in Ons Amsterdam.
Here.
Koen, shall we start with you? Because now we would like to focus, because we are discussing the general influence of cancel culture for society, but now zoom in into the cultural and art practice. What do we see there? Do we see the same questions raised by Linda, or are there some specific...
Well, Linda raised some excellent points here just now. And one thing that immediately sprung to mind was, in this very same country 50 years ago, you would have the actie tomaat, the tomato act, where young actors the action tomato would disturb performances in theaters and call out the actors on stage for being old-fashioned and not serving the fate of the Vietnamese people and things like that. Same thing happened in the Concertgebouw, concert halls, where people actually disturbed the concert going on. And it's odd to see that sort of the grandchildren of these people are now defending themselves against the next generation who calls out their morals, basically.
Yeah. So we just see here a cycle.
Possibly, yes. Yep. And you're right to say, of course, that the medium, of course, has changed. The social media makes this infinitely more powerful, but it's still a matter of power and who controls things. And what I notice in the case of this Breda issue, but also in others, that it's not so much the artist or the public that are important, but it's rather the intermediary, the institution, the museum, that is really challenged. And it's disappointing that they fold quite quickly sometimes for something that you can't really imagine. The Philip Guston is an interesting example. It's a show that was going to be in the Tate. Philip Guston's an American artist, and in some of his paintings you can recognize Ku Klux Klan-like figures. And everybody knows that an exhibition like this takes 4 years to prepare, but suddenly somebody online says, oh, look, they're showing Ku Klux Klan images. And at that moment, the Tate folded and said, oh, we're going to postpone this. And the curator was fired, or rather silenced. And I think there, it would be good for people in these institutions to realize what they are actually doing and what their function really is.
And when you say this has always been there, so you focus now on the cultural institutions are the ones in the shooting zone. Is that different from earlier periods? Were the same institutions being targeted, or is that new about?
I think the essence of it must be the same. Yeah. And you mentioned academia, where the policies of the management are challenged by the students. It must be exactly the same as what happened in the 60s and 70s and 80s. You might even say, on a wider sense, that this element of debate has left our public forum over the last 2 or 3 decades, but everybody being complacent with what's done. And this is really what it should be like. This is really what you should do.
This should be daily, but this should be on a daily basis. Even.
Yes, if you and not to get too much into this specific case, but I notice there's a lot of these intermediaries in the arts that put out their stuff and bravely say that they'd like art to be abrasive and confrontational. Well, there you go. Now you've got it. Or you say, we're looking for dialogue. Well, here you are. And I find that they're not really haven't maybe thought this through. How are we going to conduct this dialogue? I don't know, well, what does it really mean? And again, I find it sometimes a bit spineless of these institutions to quickly fold and close their stuff and remove the painting, instead of saying, no, this is what we decided on, this is what we think is important, suffer, just take it in.
Okay. Alina, how are you in this conversation?
I'm trying to keep track. I'm also trying to, I would love for there to be a fact check for both of your standpoints, because I think there's much to be added to both.
Yeah.
But also I'm slightly disturbed by the thing that's hanging above our heads right now. Yeah, I don't know where to begin. Where
do you like to begin?
Well, I think my biggest worry coming here was not just the move from the online to the live, but more the idea that my presence here is a bit instrumentalized to promote an artist, which is not something that I necessarily would like to do, because I think there are much more interesting things that need to be talked about in terms of how cancel culture has been framed so far, and in terms of the impact that it has, in terms of where it actually originates from. And yeah, over the past few weeks I've been reflecting a lot on all these things, and I've also tried to be an active voice online in order to promote several causes, not just this particular one.
So shall we start with where it originates from? This is interesting because Linda made some comments about where she thinks this phenomenon comes from, and social media, voices being heard and being listened to. Koen says, well, it has always been there. It's just for the last 2 decades it wasn't there, and now, thank God, he says it's back.
Perhaps.
I agree with the fact that well, this is a new phenomenon in the sense that it's mainly based in the online, but it has roots in protest culture in general.
Yep.
So that's accurate, but I also think it's worth mentioning that it originates on Black Twitter. So it's usually women protesting the behavior of men on Twitter, which were kind of crossing the line. So that's something that needs to be added to the whole, etymology of cancel culture. Second of all, I think the people protesting now, are the follow-up of the protest culture in the 60s and 70s, but they're also much more international and they're much more broad. As an illustration of that, we're talking in English, and I think I might be the only person in this panel who would need to talk in English because I'm not Dutch. So,
Okay, that's interesting. Is that Alina is making some differences with earlier protest movements? It's more international. It's done online. Does that make a difference in your?
I don't know. You'd have to really go into the sociology of protest. But I would imagine that the Socialist International was pretty international, and that conflict here was immediately echoed with conflict there. And there was, in the 1930s, the dock workers in Australia expressed their solidarity with the people working in Indonesia under Dutch rule. I guess, again, the media, we're perhaps a bit obsessed with these media, that suddenly you hear all these voices. These voices were already there, and they maybe were channeled in a different way, and the debate might have been more polite, or it might have been more subdued. But I guess it was always there. Again, I'd like to repeat that I noticed, especially as, if you look at art critique of the last years, that was actually quite dull. Everybody seems to like everything. I'm getting ahead of myself, but there's a prize in the Netherlands called the Prize for Young Art Critiques, and I was on the jury of that. And there wasn't a single angry voice there. Everybody just appreciated everything. And that's odd in a way. So, and I find, especially in the Netherlands, for instance, with the way the Netherlands press reported on the elections in the United States, as if something horrible was going on. And there was something horrible going on. But basically what you see is democracy in action and very strong opposite voices. And we may have been a little bit too pampered or a bit too...
Okay, so Alina, now these voices are being raised. What do you think are the main themes, or what should the voice be about, according to you, when it comes to the cultural and the cultural practices in the Netherlands or in Europe or in general?
I can only observe what's happening.
Sure,
so I think there's a lot of call for, tackling racism, sexism, xenophobia, and mostly tackling this sort of unbalanced power structure. So there's a lot of people that feel that they indeed don't have power. Some people that actually are within structures of power and they still feel that they don't have power. And they're doing their best to speak against that and to try to break down hierarchies, especially since the title of the event was, established structure?
Justified criticism of the established order
the
or
established
the creation
order,
of new
there we go.
taboos.
Yeah, I found it quite interesting to mention the established order and also like justified criticism of the established order because it's almost as if the established order would be a good thing. I would say that it's quite an ossified structure that needs to be shaken a little bit and people...
If I may touch on that, there's one thing I don't...
Because I would like to ask the both of you, what's on the table? What should be, because I think you both have an opinion on this established order and how it should be...
Yeah, well, you first or me?
Please, you wanted to say something.
Well, yes. Well, one of the things of established order, which is relevant also in this case in Breda, is the way works of art are presented to the public, especially in public space. This is in a certain way. And I suspect that behind this is a kind of ethic, or you might say a modernist ethic, which has been around for 100 years, that, you know, it's good for you to see stuff that you perhaps don't like, you know, or you have a nice street with historic buildings, we're going to put something concrete right there, and this is change, and change is good because it's change, and in a way, this hierarchy of the way art is produced and how it's presented in public space still doesn't sit well, you might say, with contemporary viewers, because they're much more vocal, they're much more used to respond to these things, and they're much more used to be listened to, and they have more media to do it. So your grandparents would walk by that statue that the city put up in the park and say, well, we can't do it. Now, of course, you can mount any kind of response to that. And so that system of how you do it as a cultural institution or as a festival, that is something that these festivals or these institutions should really think about. And that, if you want to use the term ossified, that it's oddly this kind of modern idea that is now getting out of date.
Okay, well, let's discuss later on how they're dealing with it, but Alina, what's for you at stake?
I think for me personally at stake is the way in which we make art and the way in which we relate to our audience, but also to the people that help us make the work. I think what's at stake is realizing that we don't just make for a market, and we're not just like after selling. I think what's at stake is it's more important to look at your work with a critical eye instead of just making provocation for, I don't know,
Is it about communication, you think?
I think there's something lost in translation when you make such a big festival as BredaPhoto, and you commission works on such a large scale that you kind of lose the direct criticism as you're making the festival. I think it's interesting. I mean, that was part of the criticism that We Are Not a Playground brought about. It's interesting that this work of Erik Kessels, which is right now hanging in a cube above our heads ominously, was looked at by several pairs of eyes. It was curated into this show, but nobody thought, hey, maybe this is not the best idea. Maybe this is. I think it was just meant as an empty provocation. Okay, fine, Erik, and we can talk about that. But I also think we can do better than this. I think it's worth to reflect a bit more before unleashing this into the world.
Koen, is it a broader critique? Is it something you hear more often when it comes to Dutch art?
Actually, I may be misunderstanding this, but I think there might be such a huge error of judgment here that you have to first assess what the consequences of a certain work might be, and then choose not to do that. I mean, that would be true always, of course.
Okay, but who is the audience? Who are you catering to?
So especially if you put something out in the kind of context that it was put out in, but still, you might get over hygienic if you do that. You might be beginning to.
Would you though? I mean, would it be fair to say that the work in question, the pictures of women that are, or people that present as women that were passing through plastic surgery, that were like subjected to plastic surgery and later on asked to be mutilated by skaters, would you think this is like this thread? If I present you this idea, do you think this is necessarily something that should be?
I will immediately say yes. I find this. If this artist makes this case, I would immediately say, okay, fine. But the question, how you would present it next, and in what kind of circumstance? Yes,
exactly. But let's discuss this, because it's interesting when it comes to you're stressing the importance of audiences. So it's also the question, where do you do it?
Thinking through and like not promoting violence against women, but okay.
Yeah, but so I think what's interesting here, it's also, I think, but correct me if I'm wrong, who do you give the floor to? Who is supposed to be on stage? Who is supposed to get the attention, regardless of the question about the work of art itself, but also is being showcased? And what I find very interesting is that underneath a lot of these discussions is the issue of commercialization. And also that's one of the things that's often being called for, is to call for a boycott. Or as we've seen with Football International in the Netherlands, where they make homophobic and transphobic jokes and racist jokes at the talk show table. And then activists do not call for the TV show per se to be cancelled, but they say to advertisers, are you sure you want to advertise here? So again, it's not just a critique on the work itself, but also a critique on power structures. So on the establishment, and that the way the establishment makes choices, who they give the floor to, who is allowed to make money, who is allowed to get the grant.
But is that what you mean, Alina, when it comes to, are you reflective on what you're doing in what kind of context?
I'm referring, I don't even put the sponsors in question here. No. I'm just referring to, the artists thinking through to what they're doing and the curators thinking through. And I mean, I'm an artist. I tend to try to think through when I put out a work into the world. And this just, for me, I'm sorry, but feels sloppy and it feels like rushed through and it feels like, if your criticism has been that, and it has been extensive in several magazines, not just in cancel culture and one group that tried to make a petition and everyone subscribing to it, have these questions not come up during the process of curating this work? That is my question.
Because what kind of impact is this making, Koen and Alina, for you both? These new voices using these new media on artists and cultural institutions. Do you see a difference with your activism, and is there something changing already in your impression?
Well, yes, there is something changing, but that's because over the past few weeks, incidents have been coming up from all directions. So this is just one example, but there was also another incident related to another festival, an online festival called Economia Festival. Yep. There was the NRC article, now infamous, that everyone knows. And these things are actually leading to discussions on all layers of institutions, from educational institutions to funding institutions to, in this case, sponsors. But I find it interesting that in the case of the BredaPhoto response, there was no really further reflection. There was just a knee-jerk reaction to the fact that there was a petition coming up, and there was, I would say, a layer of offense to the fact that the sponsors decided to retract, but there was no actual engaging with the topic, and I don't consider this to be engaging, by the way.
Yeah, okay, that's clear. And that's a different response you see from different artists or different institutions, because they're responding different and in a good way, that it's making a change.
I think everything is snowballing into an actual moment of reckoning and change, in which, people are assessing their values in the art field, in the Dutch art field, but also, I would say, internationally, because even the case of the Philip Guston exhibition is quite interesting. For example, there I tried to listen to an interview with one of the directors of one of the museums from the States, and her response was that they had an issue of diversity in their institution, so they decided to postpone the exhibition because all the curators in their team were white, assigned to this particular show. And they decided to think, okay, maybe we should, considering it's 2020, rethink things and reframe things and take our time. So they decided to take in potential criticism, but rather than, because this is actually, I think this is what We Are Not a Playground would like. At least this is what I gather from it, but again, I'm not part of them, so I wouldn't know directly. For this sort of reflection to happen inside the institution so that it leads to actually a more complex work at the end. So I'm sure the Gasten exhibition, when it will be out, I will have a lot to live up to begin with.
That's an interesting question. So Koen,
Yeah,
do you agree? Because Alina says I see change. I see artists, cultural institutions responding. Some are responding well. Some are still struggling with the response. What do you see in this? And then the second question would be: is changing art? Is getting art better because of this? But that's the second question. Let's start with.
That's a tough one because.
No, later. Let's start with Alina
because I hesitate to speak for an artist. But
sure.
yes, of course you see these changes, and without sounding 100 years old, you can see these seesaw movements going throughout history. If you look at pictures of 20-year-old men in the beginning of the 20th century, they all have beards. They all want to look old, and that was the thing. You want to be old and wise as soon as you could. Now it's the reverse. Everybody's wearing fancy sneakers to look young, and this may sound silly, but then again, I've been on committees. The Amsterdam's Fund for the Art, for instance, where everybody was obsessed with finding the younger generation as a target audience. And I remember once allocating, I don't know, something like 15 festivals or something, cost for them, and then counting how many kids were actually having to go there, and then counting how many kids there actually existed in Amsterdam. And it meant that all these kids in school had to go on their bikes all summer finding all these festivals. And so you see these obsessions that come and go, definitely. Yeah. Underneath, of course, are, as you rightly put, there's a sense that complexity is a feature of today, and you cannot just choose one thing, but you have to constantly incorporate all these variations within your organization, which is excessively difficult and maybe in some cases absurd. But anyone growing up in these institutions now has to be aware of that, of course. Yeah, so it has to be aware of it, but are they aware of it? Because Alina says, I see change. I see institutions responding. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And if there are any questions, please ask them. I
can be sarcastic about this, but I once spoke to a comedian from Caribbean descent, and I asked how his stand-up, basically, and said, how's life going? He says, oh, it's easy. I'm funny and I'm black, so I can sit by the phone and just wait, because everybody of all these traditional institutions need me to liven up their openings or to involve me in their program. And again, I'm being ironic here, but there is that. There is that kind of...
Can I add something?
Yeah, Linda?
I think, I don't know anything about art, but I do see that a lot of this debate takes place in the cultural sector. And that's also because the cultural sector is responsive to these things, because they are willing to listen. And then sometimes maybe they listen and they avoid any kind of discussion and they just, get rid of it and that's it. Or sometimes they do organize conversations between activists, as we've seen in Amsterdam with the school, the club. Yep. But I think also the fact that it was the school that became the target of criticism was because the school was willing to listen. Whereas, there's other clubs that are way more racist, you could say, but the school
for people who don't know the school, so the claim was they were not inclusive enough and not having entry for everybody in the club. Yeah.
And the reason why they were susceptible to that critique was because they find it important to be inclusive. And I think that makes it interesting to watch these discussions going on, because for the cultural sector, of course, they are the place to listen to these things. They are the place where activism should find its voice. And so we're seeing a lot of these instances in the cultural sector, and not, for instance, in places where you might argue it's worse. Or the situation is worse in terms of these things that people are fighting
for. You're calling out these institutions on their own values.
Exactly.
And that's what makes it so interesting. That's what makes it,
So, Alina,
to add to that, I think it's quite interesting, for example, that you have a new generation that's being educated in quite, higher values, I would say. But you still have the institutions that are educating this generation not really catching up to what the institution is feeding their audience. So this is where the clash kind of comes.
You see,
Don't worry,
organizations.
you'll be on the other side eventually also.
Well, I hope not, of course. I think you can also keep up. You don't have to, it's not about, I don't think it's about age. I also don't think in the case of this work, it's about like people necessarily being tied to their gender and needing to like take positions, because this is also something that came up, like, if only more women were in power, then, institutions will be better. Not necessarily. And it's if only more young people, it's not that. I think it's a matter of mentality, and it's a matter of listening to the discourse that's happening.
Last thing, because you said that was very interesting, Alina. Also, the art, well, it doesn't get better maybe, but more reflective. Could you elaborate a bit on this? Because I'm curious about Koen things. Do you think that by raising these voices, by having the impact, what then changes in the end?
Well, I would say that what changes, and also what is one of the things that it should bloody well change, is the art world will become more inclusive and more diverse, which would reflect a bit more, society as a whole. This is a very, diverse country, but I would say the art structures don't really reflect that. Not in terms of gender parity, not in terms of race, not in terms of, ability and disability. So I think that needs to be, better translated to the people that make the works and the people that like run the structures of the art world. And it's happening, but it's happening slowly because it's
too
just,
slow.
Yes, and I agree. And it's sometimes about very fundamental things. I remember the Biennale in Venice a few years ago with Enzo was the curator, including a lot of works of art from Africa. And an element of the debates about that was this isn't really modern art. This isn't really contemporary. This is other stuff. It doesn't work the same way. So the paradigm of what art was is under debate there. And so you get into very fundamental stuff where you would say, yes, well, this is an interesting person, but what he makes isn't really art because we know what that is. And these things change too.
What the established order is.
Yes.
Well, let's end with this for now. Thank you so much, Linda, Koen, and Alina. We'll go back in a few minutes with our second panel, but now we have a beautiful performance again by Bart.
Where the hell did you go? I can't find you. I called you on the phone, but you didn't answer that, no. You'd always answer there. Where the hell did you go? I wanna know your story. Think I deserve to be told. I think it's wrong, for you to leave like that. I need you to be there, to look over my shoulder. I need you to be there, to look over my shoulder. Where in heaven did you go? and now your face will never show again, again, again. I think it's wrong for you to live like that, 'cause I need you to be there to look over my shoulder. I really need you to be there to look over my shoulder. Where the hell did you go? Where the hell did you go? Where the hell did you go? Where in heaven did you go? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, where did you go? Where did you go? Where did you go? Thank you.
Another beautiful performance by Bart Reining. We go to the second part of our evening on cancel culture or call-out culture. What do you want to call it? We have three more guests to join our here on stage. Please applause for Erik Kessels, Nanja van Rijssen en Fleur van Muiswinkel. Here they are.
Hello.
A very good evening. Hello.
Hi.
To the left, Fleur van Muiswinkel, director of Breda Festival. Here to my right, Nanja van Rijssen, co-founder of Women Skate the World. And in the middle, Erik Kessels, artist. And already discussed you a bit during this evening. So let's start with you. What have you been picking up in the last 45 minutes? What really struck you and what's something that you would like to take on during this discussion we're having?
I think most of all, what I kind of regret in this case a little bit is that the discussion about the work, about the content of the work, in a way has never happened because, there were several attempts also before the work was removed in a way to get in discussion with the people that really kind of hated the work. That was not possible. And I think that that's also something we and I regret in a way because in the end, the discussion went on through cancel culture, and that's where we are now in retrospective after all this has happened.
Because that's what we've been discussing up until now, where it comes from, the new media, the new voices, what the program is or what they want to achieve. Is that something you were familiar with before you got cancelled, maybe?
No, I think I can honestly say that I have never expected that reaction. No. And I mean, also to answer Alina, I think also the work has been on the table for 1 year. Mm-hmm. Many eyes have looked over it, festivals, sponsors, foundations. and also journalists, interviewers, and there has been a lot of attention to the work before it even was there, because the work only happened at the very last moment before the festival opened.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. And that is something I was quite surprised about, that then suddenly, I mean, that's something I did not expect, and I think a lot of people, even also of BredaPhoto, didn't expect that, and so that.
Okay.
Well.
Because now, that's an interesting question for you. Were you already aware of the work before, or was it when it was installed and it got the attention, and then it also got your attention?
I was informed about it, I think, the day that the skate park posted it on Instagram. So someone sent it to me, another skater sent it to me, like, hey, do you see this? What the fuck? We don't agree on this.
Yeah.
And that kind of spread throughout the skate scene, or especially throughout like the girl and queer skate scene.
Yeah.
And then
by using social media, I guess.
Yeah, if you got WhatsApp as social media as well.
Sure,
yeah. So then it's
you were sharing
like
the pictures of the work.
the pictures, the link to it, the comments on it, also the pictures of when I think like a test edition something was posted on Instagram, and there were some like slightly negative comments maybe on there as well, and people were sharing that as well. So it kind of spread throughout the scene. And then it got picked up and it got amplified, it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think no one expected the protest to become that big. But like even on that Friday when I heard it, even that same night, it got really big already. Yeah.
Yeah, so it goes fast.
Yeah.
And what was for you the importance of having an opinion on this work? What do you want to, what's there on the agenda for you?
So on the agenda, like personally, I didn't like the work itself, but it's just a matter of opinion.
Sure.
So what was more on the agenda for me for like protesting it is the fact that the impact of it could be harmful towards the children or youth and young girls that were in that context where it was placed, without like more information in that specific context. You could look it up on the internet, you could read what the intentions were, but you cannot expect of like minors to go on the internet and research what they are destroying, as it's called.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so it's very specifically the users of the Breda skatebaan, Pier 15. Where are they? What are they doing? And how
and then
at
the moment it grows bigger, then
also
also the people who see it on online, on like Instagram and stuff. So what happened in daily life is that in the same week I was teaching young girls in this skateboarding and empowerment program. And those kids had seen the pictures of the artwork and they know that there's a protest going on, so they felt more empowered, you could say, because they know that someone is standing up for their values. So it's also on the online thing. As soon as it got attention, then of course they are also seeing it.
Yeah. Is that something you realize now, Erik, when it comes to
I think there is, in that sense, also quite a big misunderstanding. I mean, I think like there are a lot of people who have like the biggest criticism that they never have visited the installation itself. I mean,
so it's the picture.
Apart from that, I mean, the whole intention of the work, and that is also a misunderstanding, I think. I mean, people might hate it or might like it, but the intention of it is that it's a mirror on society and how young girls, people now just modify themselves, and how people use cosmetic surgery. And and the work has also a certain irony, of course. By skating over it, there would be a natural aging again after that happening. And
and then Nanya says that there's also an impact for the scene itself and the queer and women community within this scene, the skate scene, because they could feel less represented or maybe even.
Like you got to think of it as the power structure. So we were talking about before. It's like fact is that the art institution is ruled by mainly middle-aged men. And I'm not in the art world, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. But the same goes for the skateboarding world. Like most people in power are still the white middle-aged men. So at the moment when girls and queer and like all the marginalized groups in skateboarding are fighting for this place on the table, or like equal treatment and media representation, that has been a quite big fight over the last couple of years, and now that it's finally getting better, you get this artwork there, and I get that the intention was different, but the impact of it felt like a slap in the face, like destroying women's faces. That was something that fell really hard with the community that was just fighting against these power structures.
Okay, that's clear. Do you understand that slap in the face?
Yeah, but there is of course also a difference between activism and something political and the work of art, of course. I mean, I think that like an artist and a work of art should also have a certain freedom and a certain safe space to work in. You know, like I think an artist should be able to express himself or herself in with a certain irony, with a certain idea, with making a confrontation. People might hate it, might like it, but it is also especially there to spark the debate, the discussion.
No.
And of course, I'm open to...
But in a safe space,
Nanja,
so in a museum.
Yeah.
So in a place for art. So that's the whole thing.
That's probably also one of
well,
the...
let's go to Fleur, because that's I mean, not only not immediately go to what kind of space do you need, but Fleur, were you anticipating? Erik says, well, I mean, the work was already known before it was placed, and it was placed, and then the commotion got there. What was there? Did you ever thought of the commotion, the response it got?
Well,
any signs?
I started at BredaPhoto at the 1st of April this year. And
You're
many of the
newbie
conversations that Erik had with the organization of BredaPhoto was before I was starting. Nevertheless, I know that, as Erik also already said, that there had been many conversations about the work, also with the owners of Pier 15, the people who die het uitbaten.
Yep.
I think what we never could have foreseen is indeed the impact that the work would have as soon as it got captured and shared over social media. For me, working in the art field already for now, I think 16 years now, this was the first time that a work of art that I was directly confronted with, because it was happening within BredaPhoto, within the context of, and that is, I think, quite important also to know and to emphasize again, within the context of a thematics called The Best of Times, The Worst of Times. And I think also, coming from that perspective and the approach of the curators, trying to find out, like, we are living in a very chaotic time, and there are so many things happened, and Erik wanted to address cosmetic surgery, and in a particular form, and I know for sure that many conversations have happened before it was actually realized. Also with women, with men, but the impact that it got, or that was the effect of it when it was captured by somebody making a picture, and it's going viral, and people are interpreting that image instead of the work itself. Many of them haven't been there, haven't read the contextualization of the work, and I think that is for BredaPhoto absolutely a learning point. And I think also what Koen already said, like, this is a new phenomena, like, or a new area of public, who you don't know necessarily. They come from different angles and very unexpectedly. So
that's true. On the other hand, there is a skate community. I mean, so maybe the skate community, I'm not sure if they were involved in the proceedings, but you could say maybe a learning could be to, if you do it in a public space,
well,
maybe
I know
make sure...
from the director of Pier 15 that there have been conversations with the female skate community they have in the house.
Yeah, sure.
And still, the reaction when it got on viral was so much more hateful, because it stated that it was that they interpreted this the artwork as setting out for hatred towards women, and that was never the way it was presented to us by the artist. It was never the way the curators interpreted it.
Yeah.
I mean, somebody asked me in that week when the criticism happened, like, what do you're a woman, and then I'm still there, and I'm like, I would not have agreed to have an artwork that sets out towards hatred to women. I mean, that's just, BredaPhoto is not there.
Yeah.
Let me just, I just want to finish this up. BredaPhoto is not there to set out for any hatred, but it does facilitate artists which have a point of view, choose their form, and of course we talk about it. I think that is very important that we still do, that we continue doing this also for the future.
But what I find interesting is that the challenge for a cultural institution or artists is that the contexts are changing. Right? So the social media is a new context where people are creating their own context, and you get a response which is very different from the context of the skate park, where you can talk to people and maybe you can even agree on the work. Yeah. But that's only one context. There's another context being put next to, and that's something you have to relate to.
Yeah. Well, that was also one thing that it's quite frustrating so there were the two forces, one of the female skate community, which was more, the Pier 15 was more dealing with them, and they got in contact with them and they spoke to them the moment that the criticism was received. We got a criticism also from the petition, the two women who started the petition. Yep. And I repeatedly asked them to have a conversation, and I'm really happy that Alina is now here, and to have that conversation about also institutional responsibility. But I always rejected to have that conversation within the sphere of the internet, because I think being here physically, having like intonation, speech, body language is so important, especially when an artwork raises so many people that get hurt, then of course we have a conversation about it. But let's do it face to face on the table. Okay. Yeah.
Because Erik, how is that for you? That there's this whole new context where your work is being interpreted rightly or wrongly, apart from that, but it's a new context where you have to relate to now, no?
No, I mean, the thing is that when I make a work, and again, this is not rushed off, it's well thought of, and there was a year-long preparation for it, then of course, I totally agree, for me it's totally fine when people don't like it, but then at least let's have a dialogue and a discussion, and that is a little bit frustrating in the end, that is only happening tonight, long after the festival is finished, and of course I think that when we had that really in the first week or in the first 2 weeks would have been much better, because then we could have also solved things, and we could have, let's be honest, I am very much, we constantly wanted to be in discussion, but to really call out to remove a work and to destroy it, really, that is, that's something totally different, of course, and that is also something that, that's why we sit here tonight, because that's what happened, and some people signed the petition. They said like, I don't like the work, but I sign it, but I don't want it to be removed, or that is just. So for me, nothing. I mean, of course, one thing maybe is what we already discussed here tonight, is that, okay, when a work like this is suddenly framed online and put on there, because the person who has made that picture and sent it is probably also me, who took that picture and posted it, and but that is something maybe that you can learn from to, also do that. But again, do that differently the next time. But again, nobody of us, and I mean, we were in with the skate park, with the sponsors of the festival, with the foundation that has sponsored the piece. we were very enthusiastic about that the work was realized and how it was there.
Yeah, okay.
And,
we're about to introduce our last guest, but Nanja, what kind of difference would have been made if you would have been involved in the first week or the second week, or would have been a difference for you?
What I think that is the difference in what you guys are stating here is that all of these people who were involved in the process, they learned about the context before at that moment. But anyone who's visiting the skate park walks in, sees this. And yes, there is a context and an intention, and that might be totally different from what we see as the impact. But what happened afterwards is that what we see on the Instagram is what was presented. To find out the context and the intention, you had to look for it yourself. And then in the statements that came later, there was no reflection, as Alina said, or like it didn't feel and look like reflection. And that kind of amplified the discussion even more, where people were like, yeah, but they don't even mean it. And if I would have been involved in the first weeks, I think I wouldn't have agreed. But I don't know if that would have mattered, because I'm just that one voice. And what happened now is that in this whole cancel culture, call out culture phenomenon, we had all these different people who bundled their power to say, no, we don't like this. And whether it should be removed or not, like personally, I think it would have been fine if it was in a museum, but not in this context. But it's never been about canceling you or canceling BredaPhoto, even though that there are some individuals maybe calling out for that.
Okay, thanks.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
Because
Sure.
it's incorrect that on the spot there was no information to be found. There was actually an introduction text.
That must have been made
yeah,
clear.
I can understand that, and I think that is also something that we take forward towards the future. That you sometimes within the art field, or let me talk for BredaPhoto, this year we decided to not completely explain the work and give it or interpret it already beforehand, before people see the work
Speak it by itself.
And I don't want to say that we're gonna do that, but I think we have to rethink the language we use, where and how we present and introduce the context of works, but also the work itself. And also that when you place a work outside of the museum walls or the institution walls, because BredaPhoto doesn't have its own location in the city, we always go somewhere, or we are outdoors in the public space. This thing that happened to the work of Erik, of course, we take forward in how we will proceed next year or in 2 years when we happen again.
Okay. Nanja, lastly, when it comes to the cause that you're fighting for, you also said, well, it also organized ourselves. In that sense, maybe there's a silver lining to this all, that it also made your movement stronger, or is that too optimistic?
I'm not sure. I think it's just one of the many things that happened, and not necessarily that this thing strengthened the position of more inclusivity in skateboarding in general, but I do think that the conversation has opened for the Netherlands, because you could say feminist or like more activism in skateboarding has been a thing maybe more in America or England, and now it has also kind of started in the Netherlands, not in a way that we want to fight everything, but in a way that you need to open up the conversation about inclusivity or representation or how things are presented, and maybe that's the silver lining, that the conversation has started.
Okay, thanks. We'll introduce our next guest. You will stay here, but Nanja, you will go sit opposite to me, because we'll have a screen with us, because it's all about technology today. We have some people here on the stage. You're asking some questions, by the way, and I will come back on this also when it comes to the guest who is arriving here online. Here he is, Tunde Adefioye. I think I got it right, Tunde. City dramaturg at the KVS, the theater in Brussels. Tunde, can we hear you? Are you there?
I'm here.
Yes,
formerly city dramaturg, but now I'm a lecturer at St. Lucas Antwerp School of Art.
Yeah, the School of Art in Antwerp. Great to have you. You've been joining us for the whole discussion already, I think, during the evening. But we would like to end with you to also give us a more of an international scope, because what you've been hearing in the last 1 hour and 10 minutes, is that something you completely familiarize yourself with also in Belgium and international scene, or is there a different discourse going on over there?
One of the things that was, of course, cancel culture is something that, people are talking about. People are talking about in the U.S. and people are definitely talking about it here also. But one of the things that was kind of striking that wasn't mentioned was the fact that, part of what encouraged, and I think rightfully so, part of what encouraged cancel culture was the Me Too movement, of course, and it's something that I know very personally, and I think that we cannot miss that, I don't think that was the point of Tarana Burke's, the Black woman who initiated the Me Too reality. It wasn't her point to kind of create this cancel culture, but it was a necessary part of kind of this questioning of power. When people are what is called canceling, it's, as Alina said earlier, and I really kind of appreciated quite a bit of what Alina was saying, is that, it was a lot about power. And, of course, Linda also said it earlier, that it's a lot about power. But in addition to the fact that it's about power, it's about redistribution of power. And we need to think deeply about that. And what does it mean when we think about redistribution of power in regards to cancel culture? If you look at here, for example, one of the examples of kind of the Me Too crossing the cancel culture is, for example, Jan Fabre. This is, I think many of you know him either as a choreographer or a artist, there was a huge uproar, but it's hard to kind of go to what Kuhn was saying as asking the question, was it successful? You cannot define this sort of canceling or the sort of different initiatives, the different letters, the different mobilization that mostly women, mostly feminists, took to make people informed. Like one of my friends, for example, who was kind of driving this sort of informing people about Jan Fabre and how Jan Fabre uses power within his dance company. It went all the way to the Skirball in New York. The show Jan Fabre's show finally went on. No one listened. Sorry, not that no one listened to the letter, but the letter was not really used the way it should have been used by the director of the Skirball in New York. So the show went on, but it does not mean that it does not mean that it wasn't effective, because the effect of it is that people are now informed about, not only about Jan Fabre, but people are informed about how we need to change the culture that is, as has already been said many times, that is predominantly dominated by a sort of white, patriarchal kind of framework. Yeah,
because Tunde, this is interesting, because you say we're in a stage of informing, you say. So would that be the stage we're still in? Because you have different, once you get informed, you can act on it when it comes to changing the power structures or being more inclusive. Are we already in that stage or are we still in the informing the wrongness of institutions, of the lack of inclusion, etc.?
Oh, yeah, well, it's not static, right? It's not static,
Sure.
The term, people have said it a few times already, intersectionality. Intersectionality was a term that Kimberly Crenshaw came up with, in the 80s, but, it's just now in the 2000s that more and more people are talking about intersectionality. So these realities are not static. People get informed, and then we kind of, as I guess beings, we kind of fall into our old habits. You know, there was a moment now with the Black Lives Matter moment, you know, where people are talking about racial justice, people are talking about anti-racism, people are talking about being more inclusive, like the institution in New York that Alina mentioned, you know. But these moments, these realities are not static. You know, in New York, you know, in 2018, you had a similar situation. I don't know if you've all heard about Dana Schultz. You know, Dana Schultz made this piece based on Emmett Till, who was a, you know, who was a teenager that was killed in the 50s, really brutally, racist incident. And then Dana Schultz, this white artist, decided I'm going to appropriate the image of Emmett Till. There was a lot of people that were not happy. There were a lot of people who protested by, for example, Parker Posey, who stood in front of Dana Schultz's piece during the biennial, the Whitney Biennial in New York. You see, this was 2018. So what I'm just saying is that, you know, these things are not static. We're having conversations, but things are also moving. You know,
and let's explore this moving, because you say in the end it's about power structures, about this white male-dominated patriarch. How do we change the power structures in, for instance, cultural institutions? What kind of examples do you see where this is really making a difference and we're really changing the system?
Yeah, well, once again, Alina kind of pointed to it. She said something about who's making, or Alina said something about who's making decisions. You know, and I was surprised that nothing was said about who has access until that point. You know, because that's what we really, in addition to talking about power, we need to talk about who has access. Who are the individuals who are making decisions on the different institutions? Who are on the board of directors? Not just, you know, it doesn't have to be just to do with, you know, for example, in this case, Fleur, who's the director of the institution, but who are the people who are on the board of directors? Are there anyone who might be, I don't know, from Ghana on the board of directors of BredaPhotos? You know, are there anyone, for example, who might be from Suriname on the board of directors of a tonel? What is it? The one in Amsterdam? You know, these are the questions that we really need to ask. You know, like for example, if you look at the board of directors of the KVS, where I used to work, good luck trying to find somebody that is of color in that. There used to be one person, but she's no longer there. You know, so we need to really kind of tackle it at that level. You know, like I'm not really worried about who Erik Kessels asked about, you know, what they thought about this piece or that piece, you know, like, okay, whatever, you know, like, whatever. I'm really worried about, you know, like, who are the people who have access to making decisions? Because the people who have access to making decisions and determining who gets funding for what are the ones that are going to also determine who comes in, what kind of artist comes in. And that's why I found, it was a joke apparently, but I found Koon's sort of mentioning of the black comedian, you know, kind of problematic, right? You know, because, you know, like, it's not about that one black comedian, right? Like I said, it's really about, you know, how many directors of color do we have running, you know, our cultural institutions? You know, how many individuals of color, how many trans individual, how many people living in, you know, socioeconomic distress? How many of those individuals do we have on board of directors? These are the questions that we really need to ask more. Like, you know, like this discussion is of course important, but we should not be distracted from the main purpose of really talking about, you know, being inclusive and really talk about redistribution of power within cultural institutions.
Can I add something?
Yeah, sure, yeah. Nanja has a question for you, Tunde.
Well, not really a question, just like
a comment. Yeah.
in addition.
Yeah, sure.
So a lot of talking in the beginning was also about media, like traditional media and social media, but the same goes for that as well, right? The traditional media, for example, are maybe giving out a platform for one of us as an individual to speak about what happened, but in the end, they're just there for reporting on the sensation. And I know that a striking example of what happened is I got this opinion piece in one of the newspapers, which was really cool. But then later on, I saw this other article about art and safe spaces, and immediately it was kind of opposed. It was this thing about artistic freedom against a safe space. But that's not the thing. The thing is, like, we were fighting the power structure of this in skateboarding, the sexism in skateboarding, and art as well. And it wasn't about making this opposing thing. And all these media institutions, a lot of people in power are still not the people that care about this fighting the injustice or the inequality. It's just, I see that like the journalist gives someone a platform, but then again, just goes on to make more sensation and like to make more polarization. And I think that a lot can be win if you, in the traditional newspapers, also have this board of directors, like to be diverse and to have this intersectional view on the world, then the polarization wouldn't happen through those media channels.
Yeah, but I think that
Erik?
in a lot of cases, where you were talking about, these were opinion pieces, so everybody it's open for everybody.
But there are also non-opinion pieces in which was said, angry women make angry petition towards artwork, but that's again a framing of like women who were protesting something, and the same goes for don't know who said it, but it's like the American cancel culture feminist movement, this, blah blah blah. Even though it all started with a group chat with me and other girls who skate.
But at least there is a debate and there is a open.
Yeah, but the debate is not fair. That's kind of what I'm saying. Like if the people who are platforming the debate aren't looking at it, yeah, I think it's like an unfair debate.
Well, I mean,
sorry, can I just interrupt?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Look, that's cool, whatever. Like I said, going back to what Alina said, it's really important that, it's important to have this debate, whatever. But let's not lose, like they used to say back in the 60s, keep the eyes on the prize. If I ask all of you now, what is the prize that we're aiming for? That's a question. Like, you don't have to answer it now, but think about it. What is the prize that we're aiming for? Is the prize that we're aiming for to make it just okay for Erik to show his work? I would say no, right? That's my personal opinion, The prize for me is to make sure that when I look, for example, like I looked at the Breda photos, kind of, the different people, like it was pretty dope. Like I saw, some Chinese artists that I had seen before who do really important work. I saw this Colombian, Dutch artist who does, some kind of dope work, went to Lagos where, my family is from and stuff. But I did not see, maybe I missed it, but I didn't see anybody, of what you would say, African descent or Surinamese descent, in the program, but that's another point.
Can I
okay, but Fleur wants to respond to that, and then I have a question from the audience for you, Tunde, but maybe Fleur wants to respond.
Let me just finish real quick. Yeah, just to say, please, let's have this discussion, but let's keep the eyes on the prize. The eyes on the prize is making sure that sitting next to Fleur, making decisions next 2 years are more individuals from marginalized communities.
Okay, Fleur?
Yeah, well, Tunde, I would really recommend you to have the coffee we agreed we would have, but also to have do some more research on the website and look into the long list of photographers that were selected for this edition, because you have, for example, Soraya Zaman, who makes portraits of women who became men. You have African photographers who dive into the question of how would I say it, like a trading of clothing, and how that, like the whole circular of we throw away our clothes, they go to Africa, he brings them back, makes them into like very unique pieces. So there is, and it's 56 other artists besides Erik, and there were
I was probably the only white middle-aged man on the whole program.
You were indeed, and
so
a minority in itself.
But then when is all the attention going towards you?
Yeah, that's a shame. Yeah, that's what I regret here. That was not
Tunde.
my intention.
The thing is, like,
Tunde,
you know, like,
I also have a question from the audience for you.
Okay. Now, I was just going to say real quick before you ask the question, Fleur, like, look, you know, like, what I got is what I got. I didn't even know about this situation until I was contacted to join the panel, right? You know, and I like I said, I tried my research. I did try to do my research, and what I saw on the website is what I saw on the website, you know. But the point still stands, right? Fleur, you gave beautiful examples, but the point still stands. Who are the people making the decision?
Okay, that's clear. But there's a question from the audience. Marike Wiegel asks, is cancelling art and refusing to debate the artwork not copying patriarchal discourse? And I think that's a very interesting question for you, Tunde, because you also mentioned that that's something that you are fighting against. But are we fighting with the right means to change it? Isn't it also part of that same problem?
Yeah, well, Marika, good question. It makes me think about Audre Lorde, right? Audre Lorde talks about, you know, using the master's tools to try to build a new house, you know. Yeah, I mean, you know, like, of course we can think about, or folks can think about new ways of doing this, but you have to, you know, keep in mind that, you know, this is a method that is, you know, consider it this, right? I had a great conversation with Yella about this. You know, like, you think about the Zapatistas, right? You don't see the Zapatistas in Chiapas. You don't see their faces. They're using guerrilla tactics, as they call it. So you can see cancel culture as a sort of guerrilla tactic. You know, it's like, it might not be fair. It might be harsh sometimes, you know, whatever. But when people do not have the means to fight big institutions, you know, think about, you know, the Viet Cong in Vietnam back in the days, you know. When you don't have the means, you have to be creative to fight the power, right? Fight the power that beats, you know, that's Public Enemy. So that's the way I see it, is that, you know, like, whatever, okay, you know, it might not be fair, but let's focus on why people might be doing this. Let's focus on the issue of power redistribution. Let's focus on the issue of access to decision making in terms of the funding and who gets what kind of money to be able to present their work at a BredaPhoto.
Okay, that's a very clear ending for tonight, Tunde, because it's clear what the purpose of this evening was, about all the voices. So Tunde, thanks so much for joining us online. I know you would have liked to be here, but well, in Belgium, coming here is not a good option, and vice versa. So thanks for joining me, Erik, Fleur, Nanja. Thanks so much for being part of this evening on cancel culture. Of course.
Can I just finish with adding one thing? Because no. Because I just wanted to say that we do have associate curators, one coming from Africa and one from Dubai. Okay. And I think it's quite important. I just want to share that with you, with the audience, with the people at home, to make sure that the idea that BredaPhoto and the curatorial team is a white, male, middle-aged group is just incorrect.
So that idea is wrong. We'll close with that on this evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Of course, this discussion will go on. The fight will go on, as mentioned by Tunde. But hopefully, indeed, some things will change. Thanks so much.
That's it, folks. Dat was het. Dit is uitloopmuziek.